psalm and we'll jump on in. Psalm 36, to the choir master of David, the servant of the Lord. Transgression speaks to the wicked deep in his heart. There is no fear of God before his eyes. For he flatters himself in his own eyes that his iniquity cannot be found out and hated. The words of his mouth are trouble and deceit. He has ceased to act wisely and do good. He plots trouble while on his bed. He sets himself in a way that is not good. He does not reject evil. Your steadfast love, O Lord, extends to the heavens, your faithfulness to the clouds. Your righteousness is like the mountains of God. Your judgments are like the great deep. Man and beast you save, O Lord. How precious is your steadfast love, O God. The children of mankind take refuge in the shadow of your wings. They feast on the abundance of your house, and you give them drink from the river of your delights. For with you is the fountain of life. In your light do we see light. O continue your steadfast love to those who know you, and your righteousness to the upright of heart. Let not the foot of arrogance come upon me, nor the hand of the wicked drive me away. There the evildoers lie fallen. They are thrust down, unable to rise. You'll see here in the opening, the title of Psalm 36 is of David, the servant of the Lord. And the only other time in the Psalter where you get this title is in Psalm 18. And so it clearly is stating to us that this is a Psalter that is a psalm that is all about service to the Lord and what it takes to be a servant of the Lord. And that's how we'll approach the psalm this evening. What does it take to be a servant of the Lord? And I want to just see three things. First, it takes a recognition of the depths of wickedness, verse 1 through 4. Second, it recognizes the depths of God's goodness, verse 5 through 9. And then third, it recognizes the depths of our own weakness, verse 10 through 12. So that's where we'll be going this evening. It recognizes the depths of wickedness, 1 through 4, recognizes the depths of God's goodness, 5 through 9, and recognize the depths of our own weakness, verse 10 through 12. So first, the servant of the Lord recognizes the depths of wickedness, verse 1 through 4. And I want us to sort of see a progression of wickedness sort of leading to the climax of verse 4, because I think that's how we are to read verse 1 through 4. And the progression of wickedness moves from the source of wickedness to the site of wickedness to the speech of wickedness. And then finally it culminates and climaxes in the schemes of wickedness. So I want us to note that four-part progression of wickedness. First, the source of this wickedness. Verse 1, it lies deep within the heart. The word deep conveys the depths of this wickedness that stems ultimately from the heart. So this is the source of where wickedness begins. It doesn't begin with the actions. It begins with the internal man in the depths of man's heart. Second, the site of wickedness. Note the difference between verse 1 and verse 2. For he flatters himself, at the end of verse 1, there is no fear of God before his eyes. And then it moves into verse 2, for he flatters himself in his own eyes that his iniquity cannot be found out. So there is this movement from the source, the heart of wickedness, that moves to a lack of fear of God. And without God, in the fear of God, there is excuse and there is a blindness even to my sin. And it's interesting that David writes this, and we see this even within David's life, though we'll note in a moment that David is not part of this category of wickedness as he is specifically referencing them in Psalm 36. But we think of David's sin with Bathsheba and his murder of Uriah, and it's 6 months until Nathan the prophet has to say to David, "You're the man." David, apparently for those 6 months, did not have the fear of God before his eyes. He's walking around and even condemning others who he deems to be unrighteous, totally unaware that he himself is the unrighteous, sinful one. And so David, in that episode, ironically, is a great example of what's being said here, though, as we will say in a moment, David, of course, is not speaking of righteous men such as David, but a distinct category of wickedness. So it moves from the heart, the source, to the sight, the lack of fear before the eyes of God in order to condone my sinful behavior. Then third, it moves to the speech. We recognize the speech of wickedness. Verse 3, the words of his mouth are trouble and deceit. He has ceased to act wisely and do good. Jesus will famously say, out of the heart the mouth speaks. The source of evil is the heart, and the words convey what is in the heart. And then fourth and finally, we get the culminating and climaxing progression of wickedness, the schemes of wickedness. Verse 4, he plots trouble while on his bed. He sets himself in a way that is not good. He does not reject evil. So we see the progression of wickedness here, from the control center, the heart to the fear of the Lord being evaporated, bringing forth foolish words and evil speech, and to its ultimate climax, where this wicked man plans wickedness. Wickedness, as it were, sort of sets the patterns of his day. He sets his watch by wickedness. It's interesting to note, quite literally in the Hebrew, the first words of verse 1 actually read an oracle of transgression. An oracle of transgression. Kidner, I think, captures it well. He says, it is as though transgression itself were his God or his prophet. You know, that's kind of strange. The oracle of transgression. You see it in Scripture, the oracle of the Lord, the oracle of God. Here's the oracle of transgression. Transgression is what this person sets his day and patterns his day around. Transgression is his God and his prophet. Now, to be certain, David has in mind a category of wicked people, dead set on wickedness. This is not a place in the first 4 verses that speaks of Christians and people that are seeking to live for the Lord but have moral failures and lapses. It's about the wicked that set their minds on wickedness and even seek to do harm to the good. But Paul, it is worth noting, will universalize this wickedness to all mankind, both Jews and Gentiles, in Romans 3:18, where he quotes from the psalm, speaking of both Jew and Gentile alike, saying, there is no fear of God before their eyes. And it's in the context of God putting in place both the Jew and the Gentile as those that fall short of the glory of God. In other words, we all to one degree or another fall under this extraordinarily wicked category as those that fall short of the glory of God. And now woken up by the Spirit uniting us to Christ, this psalm calls us to guard our hearts, to guard our eyes, to guard our tongue, lest God give us over to our evil and we live no longer by the oracle of God, but by the oracle of transgression, as Paul will put it so bluntly in Romans 1, calling that which is evil good and that which is good evil. That's the culminating climactic point of transgression. It begins in the heart. It moves to the eyes, to the tongue, and scheming and calling that which is evil good. So guard your eyes, guard your heart, guard your tongue. Second, he recognizes, the servant of the Lord recognizes the depths of God's goodness. Here, notice David just heaps up this language, these attributes concerning God. He's almost just lavishing God with praise over his attributes. And first we need to notice in verse 5 through 6, what David does is he captures what we might say the immensity of God, or the transcendence of God's attributes. Verse 5, your steadfast love reaches into the heavens, your faithfulness to the clouds. Verse 6, your righteousness is like the mountains of God, your judgments are like the great deep. Man and beast you save, O Lord. So what is noted here in verse 5 through 6 is the far-reaching, almost cosmic, transcendent view of God's attributes. It's far-reaching. He depicts his attributes in terms of God's transcendence. But then remarkably, David moves from the transcendent immensity of God that is beyond us to the intimate personal engagement he has with his people. Note the transition into verse 7 through 9. How precious is your steadfast love, O God. The children of man take refuge in the shadow of your wings. We see the preciousness of the steadfast love of God in verse 5 that reaches the heavens. Here it is spoken of in this most intimate of terminology as a father that takes in his children, as a mother hen covers the chicks. He takes them in the shadow of his wings. It's the intimate picture of God's steadfast love now. Verse 8, they feast on the abundance of your house. Again, the majestic, transcendent God is inviting his people into his home. The pronouns are important. The shadow of your wings into your house. He says, you make them drink from the river of your delights. Some see perhaps an echo here of Eden. But again, note the invitation of the transcendent God into your delights. He invites us to delight in the things that he delights in. We think of a good father who loves his son, and what does that father want from his son? He wants that son to delight what that father delights in. He takes him fishing, he takes him to the ball game, etc., etc. And that's kind of the picture you have here, the transcendent, majestic God inviting us to delight in what he, the triune God, delights in. Verse 9, for with you is the fountain of life, in your light do we see light. This word at the beginning of verse 9, for, which begins this verse, conveys that everything that has gone before in verse 5 through 8 is leading to this climactic conclusion. In other words, in order for us to have life, the God who is transcendent, majestic life must come and invite us into himself, who is life and light. We speak about God often in Reformed circles, about God being both transcendent and yet at the same time immanent. He is beyond us, he is holy, he is other than us, yet there is the immanence of God where he covenants with us, he stoops low, he invites us into his abode and into the shadow of his wings. And here, if God is not like that, then we are as good as dead, and we will not have life and light. The one that is the transcendent life and light must stoop down. He must not only create Adam, he must then speak to Adam. He must covenant with Adam. It's not enough for us to gaze at the wonders of his attributes like we're looking at fireworks. That one who is fireworks must come down to us and invite us into himself so that we might have life in his name. An important doctrine of the uniqueness of the God of the Bible. He is transcendent and other than us, but he is at the same time immanent and covenantly binds himself to us. So third and finally, the servant recognizes the depths of his weakness, verse 10 through 12. Kidner again writes here, and I think he writes this so well, as he often does, the psalmist finds himself stationed on the disputed ground between human wickedness and divine grace, so he turns to urgent prayer. And I think that captures really the tension you have here in the first 9 verses. He begins by chronicling the wickedness of wickedness, moves on to the wonders of God, and he's torn between the two. He could go to the left or he can go upward to God. That wasn't a political statement there. He could go this way or he could go upward. And then in seeing this tension between the two, he comes out in this urgent prayer. Verse 10, "O continue your steadfast love to those who know you, and your righteousness to the upright in heart." So you see the progression. He first basks in the objective value of God's steadfast love and righteousness, and then moves to pray that that would come into his life. And then verse 11, let not the foot of arrogance come upon me, nor the hand of the wicked drive me away. Notice the reversal. There's an order to this psalm, as there also often is in the Psalter. He begins by calling for God's goodness to enter his life, which was captured in verse 5 through 9, and ends by asking the wickedness he has witnessed not to enter into his life, verse 1 through 4. In other words, he's observing the wickedness of evil, he's observing the goodness of God, and it brings him to his knees. Give me that and not that. Bring that into my life and not that. And verse 12 is the ultimate climax. There the evildoers lie fallen. They are thrust down and unable to rise. It is with the eyes of faith, confidence, and sure hope that David writes of this as though it has already occurred. Note that language there in verse 12. Hebrews 11, verse 1. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. We could really say Psalm 36 gives us a window on how to bolster Hebrews 11, verse 1. Faith. First, take notice of the way wickedness works and its downward progression. Second, swim in the transcendent yet imminent goodness of God. And then third, pray for the transcendent yet imminent goodness of God to uphold and to protect you from wickedness and come into your life, which then therefore leads to the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. And here in verse 12, in the context of Psalm 36, it's the assurance that wickedness will have its day. And we can even speak of it in the present tense. So Psalm 36, I think, is a psalm very much for us living in our own day and age. And in America, we often use the terminology of a post-Christian world. We're a little shocked by the things that are taking place around us. And Psalm 36, I think, is a great place to go. We go ahead and we chronicle and we look and we recognize the wickedness that surrounds us. But we don't sit and wallow in it. We then turn our eyes upward, consider the attributes of God, both transcendent and immanent. And we pray that this God would enter into our lives and give us the hope that one day good will conquer over evil in its fullness, and we can even speak of it as though it has already occurred. All right, that's all for this evening. Let's go ahead and move now into our time of prayer. Of course, be in prayer.